By and large, people have no idea where their clothing is coming from, what it's made out of, the impact that it has. First of all, most importantly, the planet freaking needs this, and we don't have time to be dicking around, excuse me.
You've got some great supporters in the Assembly and the Senate, in addition to who are supporting it, but who would be against it.
Mm-hmm.
There's always the people who are against it. Who are they and why?
This is my closet, a very messy closet.
70% of all our clothing is made out of plastic.
97% polyester, baby, 3% elastane.
If we don't rein in oil and gas, then what's at stake is the future of humanity on this planet. That sounds very melodramatic.
The world has not connected the dots that the fashion industry is also the fossil fuel industry.
This is a plastic fleece. The industry has really started to understand that we are causing this mess. This is confidential. Just thinking oh my gosh, look at this monster we created. What do we do?
As a lawyer and through some of the work I was doing at the UN, I saw how if we are to find solutions to the climate crisis, we're going to have to change markets. And fashion is a particularly powerful way to do that because we can all think about what we put on our bodies every day. Hi, how are you?
How are you doing?
Okay. Oh, Leo, I think we also have a little guest. I never saw myself as an advocate. I was just a person trying to figure out her life. No, I'm sorry, guys. Sorry, she was very excited to talk to you guys.
And I agree with that. It has to come through legislation. It's
if I look back to why I am doing what I am doing, it was really out of curiosity, I think. How did I have no idea about this whole world? I'm working on a bill that would address the root causes of the impacts of the industry. When this bill is passed, it will have a global impact, because what it will mean is if a company anywhere around the world wants to do business in New York, they will have to operate by our rules. And because New York is such a massive economic powerhouse, a company is going to change the ways in which they do business to be able to sell to New Yorkers.
I work with Maxime Bédard at the New Standard Institute.
I'm a lawyer by background, but I've been in this space for 10 years.
I think what we're looking for is to build a broad coalition of
that is why it's taken so long to get this massive industry on the agenda. Every piece of legislation is a campaign. There are thousands of bills that get introduced that don't go anywhere. You have to create that energy. The biggest hurdle is just to get over inertia. This represents over 76% of the total greenhouse gas emissions of the life cycle of a garment. If we do not change anything by 2050, this industry alone will represent a quarter of the carbon budget globally. We do now have the opportunity and people and a media environment that cares. Let's do this, right? Meanwhile, we see the industry itself doesn't even know their own role in the world. We need to find the information, we need to get it out there, we need to communicate it, and have an independent voice.
Welcome to How to Save a Planet. I'm Alex Bloomberg, and this is the show where we talk about what we need to do to address climate change, and how to make those things happen. And joining me for that conversation is How to Save a Planet's own senior climate reporter and recovering economics major, Kendra Pierre Lewis. I always forget you were an economics major.
Yeah, nobody remembers. I consider that a compliment, actually.
My job is to help inform people so that they can make better decisions about how to be participants in a democracy. One of the things that I'm working on right now is looking at the impact of sort of the fashion industry and climate change. It's a huge footprint, and if we're trying to decarbonize, then the fashion industry has to decarbonize as well. And that kind of led me down this kind of question mark of everything we buy is plastic. How did the plastic get into our clothing?
How are we wearing plastic?
I mean, the shirt is plastic. That's how we're wearing plastic. It's woven, it's thread. You might be able to tell if you set it on fire and it gets kind of melty.
There we go. Can't believe you didn't play with fire as children.
More than 50% of clothing material is basically plastic. It's usually some form of polyester. And that's a problem because plastic comes from oil and gas. Basically, you have crude oil. That's the thing that comes out of the ground. And they knew how to distill it to make gasoline, which is what we put in our cars. But in that process of distilling it, you end up with a whole bunch of other secondary chemicals. One of those secondary chemicals is ethane. And ethane, if you do a couple of things to it, makes ethylene. And ethylene is the primary ingredient for most plastics. The naked plastic product that you end up with looks like a pellet. They're called nurdles, which is a really cute word for something that is horribly destructive. You can heat it and you can extrude it into lots of things. You can extrude it into a plastic water bottle. You can extrude it really thin and then spin it, and then you can make yarn, which becomes a precursor for the fibers that will get woven into my t-shirt. So the main ingredient in our clothing is fossil fuels.
Hi, it's Judith Inc.
Hi, Judith. It's Kendra.
I was wondering if you had any insight into sort of like how did the plastic get into everything, like everything I'm wearing?
Yes, it's certainly not due to consumer demand, because study after study shows that consumers want alternatives to plastic. This is being pushed by the plastics industry.
My light bulb moment was in recognizing the degree to which fossil fuel companies were really leaning into plastic and were really trying to expand the use of plastic as a way of staying in business.
I wanted to put this report out because I was watching plastics becoming the plan B for the fossil fuel industry. Unless we act on plastics, those greenhouse gas emissions will be replaced with greenhouse gas emissions from the petrochemical sector.
Broadly speaking, there has been an increased investment in plastic facilities across the United States. Because fossil fuel companies are pushing plastic as a way of continuing to drill for gas and drill for oil, the share of emissions that plastic is taking up is increasing. As long as the fossil fuel industry are able to continue to pump out cheap fibers that the fashion industry finds desirable, they're going to keep doing it, and it's going to continue to be a mutually beneficial agreement.
When I first started working at Patagonia, the biggest thing that I worked on at the start was really just trying to prove that technical materials and performance materials and performance products could be made from waste, essentially. And no one believed that. We first had to get through that barrier of like, can we even build our product from waste material? Like, no matter where it comes from, whether it's plastic bottles or post-industrial waste or whatever, like we first had to do that because you had to prove that it was possible. Yeah, so welcome to the United Nations of Patagonia. Here on this side. Sometimes I've spent 2 or 3 years developing one fabric just because of all the different pieces that go into it. Why do we use plastics in our clothes? We're developing a lot of these highly technical materials, lightweight materials. There's lots of performance aspects. Higher strength, longer lasting, more durable, more water resistant. It's also an issue because they're so durable. So when we're done with our garment, it isn't just going to break down, it's going to stay around for a really long time. The number one used material in the world is polyester. And so if we're able to think about the kind of impacts and changes that we're able to make in that space, then we should really be able to really make a big difference. We want to focus on this instead. Right now, if you were to look at Patagonia's line, pretty much every polyester that we make, if it's recycled, it's mostly coming from plastic bottles, and most of those plastic bottles were coming from places that are really good at recycling. I think it's a great improvement off of the alternative, which is virgin petroleum-based polyester, which is using a non-renewable resource, but we could be sourcing polyester from a way more meaningful place. We could be sourcing it from places in the world where they don't have municipalities, and we could be using our business to funnel funds towards a community that needs to be uplifted. All right, moment of truth. We've gotten through the gauntlet for snagging, and now we have to check out things like waterproofness, and the mechanics of the face fabric is one of the toughest things to get through for a new fabric like this. So,
see if it passes the hydros now.
Yeah, let's run hydros. Everything is on the line in the lab, because if I can't pass something simple like tearing strength or snagging resistance, and that fabric isn't up to Patagonia's high level of quality, then we can't support that cause. It's crazy the kind of commitment that it takes to get through all this. I think that the apparel industry as a whole probably uses plastic in a very different way than Patagonia uses plastic. I think we're using plastic in order to lengthen the amount of time that our products last, but a lot of times plastics are used in apparel to create a more commodity good, something that is made faster, cheaper, and at greater scale.
What changed sort of the adoption of polyester and synthetic fibers was the rise of fast fashion.
Fast fashion is the business model of disposability. So instead of having limited styles every season, you introduce new styles and you introduce a new way of consuming. This is a very new phenomenon. We went for millennia of dressing ourselves in things that came from a farm to, in about 2 generations, seeing synthetic plastic-based materials completely take over natural fibers. Correlation does not lead to causation, but in this case, it's pretty clear that fast fashion is a business model built on synthetics. At the moment, we are going from traditional fast fashion players to even more fast fashion, even cheaper products.
I spent $2,000 online.
The fault is not on us, the consumer, it's on the industry that has been marketing to us in the most intense way possible.
Because oil and gas are so cheap, the clothing that we get as a result is really cheap and in many cases not durable. And so we end up spending less, but we're consuming more. In the United States, we have increased our clothing purchases over the past 15 years by 60%, but we wear clothes half as long. You're essentially telling people you can buy more clothes for less money. And there's this other thread, which is we're telling people you need to have the current style. And those two together creates this huge market explosion.
Is the solution buying a Patagonia jacket?
I'm not a nudist, so I embrace the reality that we need clothes. And ideally, if you are going to buy clothing, you should be buying clothing that is better constructed, uses better materials, has fairer wages, and can last a long time. But that isn't a solution. That's just essentially living in the world that should be. And so at some point we just need to stop consuming. Where we've been failing is we create these products and then we don't worry about how we're going to get rid of them. We don't worry about the environmental impact. That's somebody else's problem.
You can't just throw your clothes into a blue bin like recycling. There's too many complexities with clothes.
We throw away over 80 pounds of clothes per person per year, and that's just throwing it away. That's not even donating it. When we donate our garments, very little of that is actually ever resold. Only about 6% of the clothing that comes in is ever sold in those centers.
Some of it just immediately gets tossed out because they assume nobody will want it, and then the rest gets sorted, and the lowest quality tends to go to sub-Saharan Africa.
It's going to end up ultimately becoming the waste for the global south to manage, either in landfill there or burned, more likely. All of the carbon that has gone into the garment is burned and put back into the atmosphere. We've been led to believe that donating things is an unqualified good thing to do. But because of this disposable fashion, if we don't find value in it, it's actually going to be very hard for other people to find value in it.
So often what ends up happening is we become obsessed with living these so-called like virtuous individual lives, buying quote unquote the right things, that we don't take any effort to sort of address the larger systemic issues that are pushing us into these false decisions.
There's no way that the consumer can figure out this problem on their own. At the end of the day, we really need legislation and governments to step in and really help to solve this problem.
There are a number of people, both overseas and in the United States, increasingly pushing for this kinds of legislation. We need broader regulation around how things are constructed. We need regulation over who bears the cost of disposing things. But it needs to be more holistic than it currently is. I think the real question is, what do we tell our legislators? What do we tell our government officials? How do we hold the systems of production accountable for the harm that they're causing?
How can we create legislation that is actually going to drive the changes that we need to see? Step number one is the mapping and disclosures of the supply chain. Because now the garment industry is basically the plastics industry, there's a key disclosure here on the materials, like just a straight up disclosure of how much material is being used and what those materials are.
Right.
Yeah.
We get no insight and information as to what companies are actually doing. These are all things that have been existing in a black box. We don't want this to be just about disclosures. Very key to this is that companies have to both create science-based targets and achieve the science-based targets. The fashion industry, just in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, has more impact than France, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined. If you ensure science-based targets across that, you are drastically reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This is our first time working through this, really translating this into policy change. Yeah. So any guidance that you have on, if you were in our shoes?
The key, I think, is just to get, try to line up, co-sponsors. If a bill like this, where I'm sure there'll be industry opposition to it, these kind of big picture items take a while. It could take years till the bill, passes. So who knows? Okay.
We don't have time to spare to get this industry under control. If we want to do our part, it's to show our legislators that this is something that matters so they can set the rules for all of how business operates.
Yeah, I can show you actually those fabrics that I was literally talking about for fall 23. So look, this is the lightweight, and then this is the heavyweight. Can you tell the difference?
Interesting.
This is what they wanted, and this is what we ended up with.
Yeah.
But I had to really fight to make this happen.
I've been working with Pasha almost since I started working at Patagonia. I work very closely with the material developers. I can basically add in environmental data. So when he goes to the business, he can say, this is a little more expensive, but there is a higher environmental impact reduction. We absolutely do not want to be using virgin petroleum-based materials in textiles. That is a gigantic waste of resources. Recycling definitely has an influence on decarbonizing in that it can have a significant, in some cases, greenhouse gas emission reduction compared to the conventional petroleum-based counterpart. But recycling isn't the silver bullet to all of our problems. It's only one piece of the carbon puzzle.
Oh, this is actually the one that's making it. A few years ago, Patagonia did a study to determine what our carbon footprint is. We basically realized between 80 and 90% of Patagonia's entire carbon impact is coming from the manufacturing of the fabric. The moment I realized the scale of the problem was on a trip to this massive warehouse. I was standing in this observation window. I was looking down on the warehouse, and it's just machines as far as the eye can see. You can't even really see the wall on the other side. I was completely floored. Just to think that Patagonia's order will just take up a couple hours of their time, and they're operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the entire year. It really put into perspective the scale at which they were producing fabric. I can look out the window and I can see the coal burning power plant, and they are producing the energy and the electricity to run all those machines. That's CO2 emissions. That's global warming. Definitely a huge wake-up call for our board. We realized that at the end of the day, if you were to look at our year's impact, if I did all this great work, we introduced all this new recycled content, all this kind of stuff, and then you look to see, oh, well, our carbon emissions are actually higher than they were last year because we sold more product.
Decoupling our emissions from our growth is probably the most uniquely difficult challenge. If we are going to successfully decarbonize just the textile and apparel industry, it is going to take designers, material and product developers, it's going to take international governments. It is going to take literally everyone who is involved in making and buying clothing to actually get it done.
I can't say I've been eating or sleeping well, but it's also the most meaningful work that I've ever done. So whenever I take things too seriously or get too stressed out, I just remind myself of that. Just personally to come full circle and to see ultimately it is about marching in the streets, and it is about law and changing that law, because law is what creates the rules of our society. We have been trained to see ourselves as consumers. Even after 9/11, President Bush said, the thing that you can do is come and shop, and that was the big contribution. That has been the message that we have been sold on, that our greatest role is to consume. But consumers are people, and we are citizens. And that's really the shift from seeing ourselves as a consumer, this passive buying machine, to people with real sense of agency, that they can change the society in which we operate. They can change the laws that we have so they better meet the needs of people and planet.
We today come together in solidarity as the Act on Fashion Coalition to demand that New York once again leads the country and stops fashion's exploitation of our planet and its people.
We have to have our eyes wide open on the scope of the problem, but know that each one of us has much more power than we have been led to believe.
It helps to be around other people, to bring you up and remind you of all the great progress that we've made. I think that's kind of an important important piece that we shouldn't forget about is like all the great work that we're doing, that we've done in the past, and there's hope for the future that we could figure this out, that we could fix this problem.
I think my official position is essentially that you should figure out what you can do to reduce your impact that doesn't make you crazy. And then take the energy that you would be using to perfect your lifestyle and use that energy in some sort of social community way and get to work.
Guys, you didn't count to 3. It's going to take a lot of imperfect people doing, the most that they can or contributing in the way that they can for us to collectively make change.
Well, so first off, I want everyone who's watching to take off their clothes and see where, the clothing tag and label is on their clothes. Knowing what your stuff is made of is, the first step in understanding the impact.
The biggest impact that you can have is how often you're wearing your clothes, like how many uses you're getting out of them.
You can see I have repaired a bunch.
Two kinds of fiber. You got natural fiber and you got synthetic fiber. Natural fiber you get from a sheep.
Buy fewer garments, buy better garments when we can, and to wear them over and over again. And when they've reached sort of their natural life, find a proper way of disposing it.
Let's buy used things. Let's buy things that still have a little bit more life in them. And if you don't need to buy, don't buy, because you don't need so many clothes.
Oh, no, it's too messy. Not that closet.